Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, March 23rd, 2021. We start the show once again under a cloud of a mass shooting. Once again, we're back to those days. We've had one or two in the last, I guess technically speaking, we've had several during the last year of the COVID pandemic. But our very high-profile and front-page splashy ones have been cut down by the fact that most of us have been stuck at home and there just aren't very many opportunities to shoot large crowds of people anymore. And we have to get back to an America where that is a possibility. Nature is healing itself, and I guess here we are. There have been mass shooting events, and of course, just last week we were talking about what amounts to a mass shooting in several different locations in the Atlanta area. But it's certainly been some time since we had one quite like this. This time out of Boulder, Colorado. And it's sparking a lot of discussion, of course, and we'll have to cover some of that discussion. But what's been interesting is it brings us a strange confluence of, two things that I've worked on for quite a long time. One of which is to, of course, bring us around to the end of the filibuster, and that's something that's been a long-term project. But I'm excited to see two of these things making an exit from American politics. One, the viability, long-term viability of the filibuster in the Senate, and the other, much more abstract and not something I set out to eliminate initially as a first goal, but something that is peripheral to the gun fail work and just the general gun law discussion in this country, which is one of the real problems that stands in the way of any kind of rational discussion of these things, which is this old trope that the day of or day after or however long, sometimes a week after an event like we had in Boulder is ducked. And discussion of it is ducked by the old trope that it's too soon to discuss something like this and that decent people wouldn't discuss something like this. And you shouldn't politicize something like this. And we've noted for a very long time how ridiculous the argument that you can't bring politics into it is. But for many years, even fellow Democrats, progressives, liberals, whatever you might want to call them, they were right there, if not shoulder to shoulder with the people who invoked it initially. They lent legitimacy to the idea. Just as, for many years, Democrats in Congress worried about things like, we have to worry about payment and offsets and the effects on the deficit of something like this. And we can't be seen, the idea being, let's keep our heads down and not give conservatives and Republicans something to be angry at us about, as opposed to actually standing up for the policy that they believed in or whatever it might be. And this is something that was adopted and sort of baked into the Democratic, the elected Democrats' approach to these things. And we're seeing that fade away. I mean, there was an incident I recall that is probably about I might be going on a decade old at this point. It's hard to tell these days. All the days melt together. But thinking about one of the now long past, probably long forgotten by most of the public, mass shooting events of the past, and using it as an opportunity once again to say, hey, it's weird, this keeps happening, only in America for some reason, and maybe we should act, and finding the then very popular Keith Olbermann. I mean, I guess he's still pretty popular, but sort of the height of his popularity with his TV show and his following on Twitter, among other places, scolding me at the time, too soon. This is bad news. You're gonna you're going to be counterproductive by discussing this thing now. Now is the time for us all to come together in unity and mourning and yada yada. You know the drill. And that was sort of the start for me, anyway. The start of the pushback of this dodge of it being too soon for us to discuss something that's we're going to and ought to obsess over for quite some time. I don't know whether it's certainly not, I'm sure, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, not designed when executed by mournful Democrats, not necessarily designed to give the NRA room to respond or gun advocates room to duck responsibility for what happened here. But that's what ends up happening with it. And, the hope, I'm sure, of Republicans and gun enthusiasts when they invoke this exception, if you will, is that a few days will pass and the story will fade from public memory and they can comfortably, what it's really meant to do is get us to the period when it will be okay for gun advocates to say that it's not their fault and that guns are important or that many more people would have died if it wasn't for the brave people out there carrying guns around who, came to put a stop to this shooting or that shooting and, in this case got shot themselves. It was always nonsense, but that struck me, and it stuck with me for a long time, that Keith Olbermann was very, and very aggressive in trying to enforce this code, too, by the way, and made it instead not only about, since it really never was supposed to be about this, but it's certainly not about enforcing decorum and bringing people together in the wake of a tragedy, because, as I recall, it came with kind of an aggressive push, like, not only is it too soon for us to be discussing this, but, you're an aggressive a-hole for bringing this up now and don't try to show off and be tougher than, and I'm like, what? We should be doing something about guns. And I think everybody kind of agrees. And of course, and there's also the difficulty of coming into a social media space and say, don't use a social media space for the purposes for which it's designed. That is to say, discussion of topics at hand of immediate relevance with a like-minded audience across the country. That was never going to happen anyway. But so there was this this very aggressive stance that he was taking, which I think has fallen by the wayside in mainstream discourse, but I also think he's abandoned since then. I think that the weight of the crowd has taken him along, and I don't know. I don't pay any attention to him anymore, but I doubt very much that he's attempting to enforce that code against anybody now, and probably it's been several years since he last tried. But okay, I just thought I would bring that one. That's what comes to mind every time I see one of these events and see people speaking to it in the immediate moment, and I realize, those days are gone. So I'm glad to see those two, arcane practices either facing more pressure than ever to be rid of it, or I think the other one, has just naturally disappeared under its own weight. So anyway, that gives us an entree to talk to speak to issues of the filibuster and other such things, and a wide range of opportunities for discussion today. In fact, Bill has sent us a few here, all the way from Portland, Maine. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. That's true. Sorry, Virginia. I'm apologizing to everybody, but yes, Kagro X has a yard sign on his lawn. I don't at the moment, but I certainly could. It's my right to do so. I've got a yard sign on my lawn, and you can't be a Commonwealth anymore. Oh, so this brings us back to on par with the rest of the political entities in the country. We're going to be a state. Can't be a Commonwealth anymore. That's just the way it is. Blame the founders. He's referring, of course, to a day's worth of bizarro Republican testimony in a hearing yesterday, and I think it was in the House Administration Committee, and I was never really clear on why they got jurisdiction of this bill, but they did, and the House has its reasons. The parliamentarian, by the way, helps weigh in on that stuff, in case you were wondering about that. It's and like everything else, it's ultimately the call of the various members who are in charge of this process who might direct it, but whenever there's some question about where the jurisdiction of a bill falls, they very often will turn to, I say whenever, so just about whenever. If there's a question, they'll turn to the parliamentarian for a ruling on that. One of the lesser known roles, I think, of the parliamentarian. Anyway, hearing yesterday on D.C. statehood, which is not a brand new issue, of course. It's been around for a long time. I recall first writing about D.C. statehood when I worked briefly at the Hotline, which is now the National Journal's Hotline, back in 1850. But it wasn't quite that long ago. But I remember doing a roundup of D.C. statehood proposals it would have been 1992. And of course, D.C. statehood is an issue that dates back even further than that. But just to give you some sense of how long I've been hearing these same arguments, although there were some real innovative arguments made yesterday, and I think they were rounded up over at Daily Kos and a number of outlets. I think I might even have put one of the official roundups in Pocket at some point. Well, a CNN piece that I think picked up on one of the dumbest that I've ever heard, really, but certainly one of the dumber ones during the early morning hours of the hearing. The headline kind of tells it all here. Daniel Dale, the fact that Daniel Dale was on it tells you, I guess, what kind of a whopper it really was. Arguing against statehood for D.C., Congressman says it has no car dealerships. Parenthetically, Daniel notes here, it does. But, of course, the bigger question is, and you might be asking yourself this question right now, what difference would that make? What difference could it possibly make? What are you even talking about? And as it turns out, I think it was Jody Heiss who got a mention yesterday for the fact that he was considering, or maybe had announced definitively, he wasn't going to be running for re-election to the House, but instead would stand for election in a primary to displace, what's his name, Raffensperger. Is it Brad Raffensperger? Down in Georgia as Secretary of State. With Donald Trump's endorsement, he was going to try and sweep out of office this, again, one of the lone Republicans who had stood up to, for whatever reasons, I mean, he's still a Trump supporter, ultimately, and a Republican, certainly, but who stood up to the effort from the White House at the time to pressure Georgia's state elections apparatus to reverse the results of its election and send instead a different slate of electors to the Electoral College and make Donald Trump president again, or part of the effort to make him president again, because he needed several states to do that. But in the meantime, he was making his presence felt in the D.C. statehood debate, such as it is, saying, among other things, that D.C. couldn't possibly be a state because if it didn't meet the definition that he imagined, let's say, the founders might have had for what constitutes a state. Why it's ridiculously small. Why its population is ridiculously small, even though it's larger than, I think, maybe 4 states. But it was very interesting to watch Republicans pile on with this theme, because there were a couple other members that followed up with it. The things that D.C. didn't have that, to their mind, constituted a proper state. Car dealerships was a weird one. And, of course, somebody did point out there is at least one car dealership in D.C. I mean, where real estate is at a premium in a city of limited size like that, and where real estate, because it's at a premium, you're paying that premium for any large-scale endeavor, and a car dealership will take up a lot of area. It's just not frequently seen. And, of course, the car dealerships are immediately available in the adjacent suburbs, and there's no real need for it. But as it turns out, there is one. And he simply offered up the excuse, I'm sorry, I haven't seen it. And it's probably because it's in a part of a D.C. where he doesn't go. He'll tell you it's a no-go zone. It's full of terrorists and thugs or something, and it's in a neighborhood and you don't see it. because you don't do any. You live in, part-time in the Capitol Hill area, I'm sure. And if you don't live in the Capitol Hill area or live in your office free of charge, you're probably in one of the tonier neighborhoods, let's say, of Washington, D.C., and having a staffer pick you up. That becomes relevant in one of the other stupid Republican objections later on. But it doesn't have a car dealership. Somebody else said, well, it doesn't have any workers in mining or gas and oil exploration. And again, irrelevant. It was just sort of telling, like, for Republicans, what are the sorts of things that Americans do in your states that make them American states, in the general sense. And the answer turns out for Republicans to be, do you sell cars and do you, practice extractive, extract minerals from the earth and burn them or something. That's qualification to be American. It's a very American viewpoint, to be sure. There was another one, a witness testifying from the Heritage Foundation, new definition of heritage we have now. His objection was that the founders never intended for D.C. to be a state, which they didn't. I mean, that's the constitutional problem, is that they said there would be this federal district that would be no larger than 10 miles square, and that's no danger of that, since a large portion of the 10 square miles was ceded back to Maryland a while ago. But that's really kind of it. And but it was his contention. This guy, I don't know, his name's in there somewhere, and I can dig it up from my tweets. But his objection was that the founders never wanted a state to host the national capital, the federal capital, because its residents would presumably have too much influence over the business done in the legislature. And by way of illustrating this, this guy said, well, how many of you, he asked the panel, how many of you saw on your drive in to work today, your drive to the Capitol for this hearing, how many of you passed D.C. statehood, pro-D.C. statehood yard signs on your way? It was unavoidable. I certainly saw lots of them, he said. He didn't pause for an answer. There was no answer from the panel, by the way. And I question whether, I'm sure they've all seen the signs, but I guess if you answer the question strictly, did you see them on your way to the hearing here today? There's a pretty good chance that they really didn't, either because they, one, are squatting in their offices as living spaces, rent-free, and didn't pass any yards at all, or two, they live in the immediate walkable Capitol Hill neighborhood, and though they would have seen, likely would have seen some of those signs around, that it was a guarantee is by no means true. Or three, they lived elsewhere, or even if they live close by, they very often have staffers pick them up and drive them in the car, and they read papers, or I don't know, they could be staring out the window at nothing, but they're not paying attention to the lawn signs. But it was an interesting argument for pro-lawn sign, pro-yard sign folks like me, and that's what Bill's talking about. The idea, though, that the yard signs are so persuasive that members of Congress cannot help but vote for D.C. statehood, despite all the arguments of the intentions of the founders and their own best political interests, because there they were, after all, on the way from home to work, several of them. There's really no resisting them. And, Benjamin Franklin no doubt stayed up at night towards the end of his career, worried about the undue influence that D.C. residents, when they got around to inventing D.C., that is, would have because of all the yard sign space available to them and no one else in order to be able to prevail upon members of Congress. So it's a very sad situation. And however, there must be a lot of signs against D.C. statehood on their drive because these Republicans remain steadfast in their opposition. Other indicators of true statehood, I guess, would be the presence of airports that brings us back to, again, the founders, of course, would have insisted that there be airports inside a proper state, even though everyone sort of thinks of D.C. National Airport. It's actually got that in the code there. DCA is the airport code. Many people have taken to calling it Reagan National Airport since they renamed it in his honor, which locals for many years just refused to acknowledge. But there's also Dulles Airport. Dulles Airport actually further out in Virginia. Both are in Virginia technically, but then again, so is the Washington football team's stadium, although it's in Maryland, and but it's been in Virginia in the past. But they used to play at RFK Stadium, which was inside D.C. Can they no longer be the Washington football team? I guess they can't be the other name. We found that out, but that's not a direct result of what the founders had in mind. But of course, the founders could have had the airports in mind. After all, we did have someone serving allegedly as president of the United States who said that the first mission of the Continental Army in the Revolutionary War was to seize control of the airports. It took over the airports. They did what they had to do. You remember. Famous speech, and so therefore now true. Anyway, I just thought the whole thing was kind of crazy and deserved some mention, just in terms of, well, I guess measuring where we are with idiot Republicans and their discussion of serious issues like the franchise, the recognition of the right to have a say in the elections in this country and to gain voting representation in Congress for 700,000 people who live inside Washington, D.C. So there you go. They were treating that one very seriously over on Capitol Hill. Other things that they were wasting their time with, I'm sure, equally interesting. Let's see. We've got a few minutes before our first break. That managed to dominate our discussion for quite a while. Let me see if we can't give you this fun and interesting story. David Farenthold brought to my attention via Twitter yesterday. Does he have a piece to accompany it now? Well, he's borrowing one from elsewhere. I just thought this was amazing, and I think it because David says so in his tweet. This Chicago story is amazing. So I tend to agree. What's the brief recap of the story in David's tweet here? The hospital, a particular hospital in Chicago, where the chief operating officer, COO, gave early vaccines, you know which ones, to employees not at the hospital, but at his condo tower, and wait till you hear where he lived, and reportedly to, this is really the bizarre part, the high-end shop where he buys watches. He's just a high roller in terms of spending money on expensive wristwatches. It's a fetish that certain people have, but whatever. But the idea of I'll vaccinate the people who work at the watch shop. I mean, that's like what's the name of that movie again? Is it? I can't remember which of the movies it is with the Jack Nicholson, and he's worried about Helen Hunt, the waitress at the As Good as It Gets. Thank you, production crew. I was like, is it As Good as It Gets? And then I was like, no, what's the other movie I confused that title with? And then, it's Complicated, right? Which is the Meryl Streep and Alec Baldwin. Is that the right title for that one? I don't know. It's for some reason, those two titles confuse me. But As Good as It Gets, where he's spending money, he has, because he's a famous author, to take care of the waitress's son so she can come back to wait on him in the coffee shop where he likes to eat his breakfast. It's just kind of bizarre. Like, I gotta be able to buy watches, and these people have to be the ones to sell them to me. If they get COVID, you can't just get some other person knowledgeable about wristwatches or knowledgeable about how to open the case and put the wristwatch within my reach. It's got to be these guys. Maybe he's stealing watches and kicking back, sales. I don't know. Anyway, the amazing part was not only that this was done, but that one, in response, the city finds out about this, by the way, and cuts off the hospital's vaccine supply, which you'd think would, engender a real serious reaction. But apparently the hospital board met yesterday and decided not to do anything about it. So that's kind of weird all by itself. David is referring to the tweet of Kelly Bauer, who writes for where? I don't know. Block Club Chicago, a news organization, I guess, based in Chicago, about which I know nothing. They wrote it up, and her tweet says it's Loretto Hospital, and their board met and they stuck by their decision to reprimand the CEO and COO, both, over the hospital vaccinating ineligible people at the ritzy condo tower, Trump Tower. Oh my God. Also at a Gold Coast shop, which I think is maybe the watch shop, and in the suburbs. And, you don't want to vaccinate people from the suburbs. They're terrible. What punishments, if any, come to them are secret at this point. And then Block Club Chicago has the full story. We no longer have time to cram that in between now and our first break. But what else do you need to know? Except that the story is illustrated with a photo of this COO, Anosh Ahmed, posing with Eric Trump. In what context? I don't know. Why? I don't know. But the photo was provided to them, so it might be that the COO himself sent it along. One note in the story that might be related to all of this and his weird relationships. The investigation into this situation started after Block Club reported on ineligible workers getting shots at Trump Tower, where multiple hospital leaders, including Ahmed, live. The criticism intensified after Block Club reported Ahmed had told people he vaccinated millionaire Eric Trump. He later claimed he was joking. I don't know whether it was joking or not. Not a very funny joke, but what a situation in Chicago. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. It makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. There are some important bits, I think, still left to the Chicago story, if you'd like to dig into some of those. And if you were wondering about which watch shop it was, I mentioned Gold Coast, but I guess I'm not familiar enough with Chicago to have known this, but now I can see from the construction of some of the sentences in the body of the piece that I guess that's a region, an area, a neighborhood, perhaps, of Chicago. So a Gold Coast luxury jewelry and watch dealer would be referring to its location. It's not the name of the shop. The name of the shop actually appears down here somewhere in the body, around where I saw the picture of Eric Trump. Geneva Seal. Does that make any sense to anybody? If you are, I don't know, if you're in the neighborhood, stop by and see if you can figure out what the F was going on and what's so important about the people who work there getting their vaccines. It's just a strange thing to do. But the story, it is kind of serious in the sense that this is a very, it's a small-ish neighborhood hospital, but I guess it is in a neighborhood where it made a difference supplying them with vaccine. It was a part of the city's PR effort to let people know, to demonstrate their commitment to vaccinating some of the harder to reach, harder to serve minority populations in Chicago. It's not where the watch shop is, I guess. And that, therefore, providing them with vaccines was a big deal. And the decision to cut off their supply of vaccines was also a big deal. It meant they had to find someone else to get to vaccinating these poor, underserved folks in the neighborhood, and that these guys were essentially stealing vaccines from those people who are, after all, we've learned a number of times that poorer and more heavily minority neighborhoods, and minorities in general, were dying from coronavirus at a rate far higher than mainstream white Americans who had the ability to, let's say, stay home and work from home, or when vaccines came out, take a day off from work to get vaccinated, et cetera, et cetera. So this was that much more egregious to have stolen these doses. But here's how they pulled it off. I mean, it's old-timey in its execution. Loretto Hospital's board of directors, which is the other story here, has stuck by two of the hospital's embattled executives as they face controversy over the West Side Hospital vaccinating ineligible people at Trump Tower, at a ritzy Gold Coast business, and in the suburbs. The board met Monday after Block Club, this is the outlet I'm reading from, Block Club, reported on how the hospital vaccinated ineligible people at a luxury Gold Coast watch and jewelry store, where Loretto's chief operating officer, Dr. Anosh Ahmed, is a high-spending customer. Afterward, a Loretto spokeswoman said the board, quote, has decided not to issue a statement. They have developed a corrective action plan and stand by the statement that was issued on Friday. But I don't know what the statement was, but on punishments, if any, what have come by way of punishments to Miller and Ahmed, and we don't have the name of Miller here, except in the photo caption up here. It's George Miller is the CEO, and Dr. Anosh Ahmed, the COO. So what punishments, if any, for Miller and Ahmed? So far, a secret. The hospital's board met Friday. Afterward, in a statement, good, now we'll figure out what that statement was. Members said they had taken, quote, appropriate actions of reprimand against Miller and Ahmed for their role in the mistakes of judgment. State Representative LaShawn Ford and State Senator Kimberly Lightfoot, who are members of the board, wisely done there, declined to comment on how Miller and Ahmed were punished. Ahmed has donated at least $12,000 to election efforts for Ford, and Miller has donated at least $2,500 to a political fund run by Lightfoot, a public database shows. And it may or may not be part of the scheme. It could be as simple as, well, they're on the board and I met them. And then they started running for re-election. And as politicians do when they run for re-election, they talk to the people they know or anybody they see on the street or in boardrooms and say, can you give me some money to run for re-election? And they might have said, yeah, sure, because I don't want to be embarrassed at not giving you money, especially since you know how much I make, since you're on the board. It would be embarrassing and awkward to sit in the boardroom with you. Or, of course, it could be, more sinister, like, I'll put you on the board and donate money to you, and you do things like take care of me. Like, I don't know, if I decide to steal a bunch of vaccines and give it to my watch dealers, you look out for me. But here they aren't looking out for me. They're not saying anything. But it could be also, I guess, more routine, maybe dirty, maybe not dirty, but, you want to be on the inside and in the good graces of state legislators. You're running a hospital, especially if you're running a hospital in a poor neighborhood where you're going to need resources. Maybe you're underfunded and you get a champion inside the state legislature to lobby for some extra funds to serve an underfunded or underserved population. It could be just like that, and it could have its sordid details too. Anyway, when asked about Loretto's corrective action plan on Monday, the hospital's spokeswoman said she had no additional information. Ford and Lightfoot did not respond to repeated requests for comment on Monday. The hospital and its leaders have faced heavy criticism from city officials who said they lost the trust of the community they are meant to serve and let people know they cut the vaccine line instead. Let people they know cut the vaccine line instead of prioritizing residents of the West Side, which has been hit hard by the pandemic. Okay, so you'll have to tell me about the demographics of the West Side. I don't know, but they have been hit hard by the pandemic, and whatever ethnicity they may be, if you're hit hard, you're going to want some vaccine and you're going to deserve some vaccine. The city's health department is investigating Loretto to determine if it's been properly vaccinating people at all, I guess, and reporting those vaccinations. The health department has cut off Loretto's supply of vaccine doses until it's confident the hospital is following city rules. I fear that we're going to hear more stories, which is why we pushed pause on giving Loretto more doses, Mayor Lori Lightfoot said Monday. They've got work to do, I think, to rebuild trust in their own community. We've already put plans together for other providers to kind of take up the work Loretto was doing, but clearly they've got to have a better system in place and better controls. I don't expect them to be coming back online anytime soon, but it's unfortunate that it's come to this. The investigation started after Block Club, as I said, started hearing reports about ineligible workers getting shots at Trump Tower. He goes on to joke about vaccinating Eric Trump. Don't know if it's a joke or not. Also ineligible, and among those receiving the vaccines, some Cook County judges also offered shots at Loretto, according to a WBEZ report. On Friday, Block Club reported shots were also administered to more than 200 members of the suburban church attended by Miller, who is also a longtime friend of the church's leader. It's nice to vaccinate church groups, but I bet there are some church groups in the neighborhood that thought they might get vaccinated instead. And on Monday, Block Club reported that Loretto also vaccinated ineligible people at the luxury Gold Coast jewelry and watch shop Geneva Seal, where Ahmed is a frequent customer. So, you weren't supposed to vaccinate either of those places, but one guy vaccinated his church and the other guy vaccinated his watch shop. I don't know what to tell you about that one. I guess it could be worse, like if he had vaccinated some people like at the, latex fetish club or something. I don't know. But watch shop, not so good. The city's health department does not feel comfortable providing doses to Loretto, given the controversies. Its commissioner, Dr. Allison Arwadi, told reporters on Friday. She said her biggest concern is the hospital vaccinating people who aren't eligible, but she's also concerned that officials prioritize vaccines for people who were well connected, really letting them jump the line. It's disappointing where providers that we think are prioritizing are not choosing to really live by the mission of their organization, and I think it seems that was the case here, Arwadi said. The Loretto Board of Directors is conducting an audit of all off-site vaccination events, and it will share its findings with the mayor's office and Chicago Department of Public Health, the hospital's spokeswoman said. Loretto Hospital is a small 122-bed hospital that operates on the underserved West Side, where people of color have been hit hard by coronavirus and few people have been vaccinated. Trump Tower and Geneva Seal are in the downtown area, where the virus's impact has not been felt as much, but where more vaccinations have been done. Ta-da! The city has highlighted Loretto's work as an example of its goal of equitably vaccinating people, even insisting on having the city's first vaccine doses administered there, to show how Chicago would prioritize West and South Side communities that are often ignored. But the hospital is now shrouded in controversy. So that kind of sucks. They tried to make a show of, here in Chicago, we're going to do things right, and we're going to vaccinate the underserved populations first, and we're going to give it to this, small hospital that cares about its community, and yada, yada. And then they stole all the doses and gave it to their watch shops and churches. I don't know. A Loretto hospital staff member who asked to remain anonymous because they fear retaliation said the controversies are infuriating because people are calling every day, waiting in line to get vaccinated on the West Side. The staff member said West Side residents also already under-vaccinated, but disproportionately affected by COVID-19 compared to the rest of the city, are effectively being punished by having their supply of vaccine doses cut off because the hospital's leaders broke vaccination rules by steering doses to ineligible people who don't live in the area. It is infuriating, isn't it? On Monday, the staff member said that many of their coworkers at Loretto are frustrated and questioning how anyone at the hospital can be held accountable. The board should have fired Miller and Ahmed, the staff member said. They'd fire any nurse who did that, for sure. We sort of have lost trust in the leadership at Loretto Hospital. We've lost trust in the board, the staff member says. It seems very, very corrupt, and it seems like their self-interests are much more important to them than serving the west side of Chicago, which so many of us are passionate about, and so many of us at the hospital for this reason, and so many of us are at the hospital for this reason. The staff member said there's very little accountability at Loretto, and the board's decision hurts the hospital, its employees, and its patients by damaging their reputation. The board has not addressed staff members, the employee said. I, as well as many of my coworkers, are very frustrated, and I think Loretto has held many town halls over the recent months about the vaccine. And Mr. Miller always talks about how he and Dr. Ahmed got the vaccine on TV because leadership is as leadership does, the staff member said. But if this is what leadership does, can we just do whatever we want? Why would I work for or trust an organization that fails to hold its leaders accountable? It's a good question. I'm sure little noticed story, and I don't know that it's going to explode into anything major, but, well, you know what the big stories are, and you got that covered. We'll get into the nuance of some of them that, like, the way only we can do here on Kagro in the morning, because no one else could possibly tolerate this. But I thought I would take this diversion. I think it's an interesting one. So does Ricky, who says, I would have vaccinated my dialysis nurses, but they've already been vaccinated. Okay, well, that would have been nice of you, but you can only do it once. Again, that's the sort of worker that we all had in mind for being prioritized for vaccinations. But then again, you're doing it in Canada, and I don't know, maybe the people in Canada, even the criminals, are too polite and embarrassed to steal vaccine outright. All right, we can move on from here to other issue areas, double back to the shooting and the gun story in general, just pick up a couple other notes on this one. Lauren Boebert, who, as you know, I believe is actually married to a gun, but a big gun enthusiast in Congress. I just found this interesting. She put out her statements, and of course she's from Colorado. I don't know whether her district encompasses Boulder. I think that's actually in somebody else's district. She's got a very large district, lightly populated, which is why it's so big in area. But anyway, for anyone curious about where Lauren Boebert was on this, I did see somebody, one wag, as they used to say back in the olden days, say that they had a developing Boebert situation in Colorado for active shooter. But it makes sense that people would go to her for comment on it, given, how gun crazy she is and how, remember, she owns a restaurant called Shooter's Cafe, and she requires all the wait staff to open carry firearms in order to work there, which is somehow not discriminatory because guns, God, who knows, whatever. But anyway, she put out a number of statements, but I guess her official initial statement here was, as we continue to hear the news coming out of Boulder, she's now very quiet, and meek and all this. I'm praying for the police, first responders, and those affected by this tragedy. That would be, of course, the victims, the regular people who got shot while they were shopping at the supermarket in Boulder, Colorado. But she doesn't, call them out individually. Police, first responders, everyone loves those guys. The rest of the losers who got shot by this awesome, godly weapon, well, yeah, okay, I'm praying for you too. May God be with us as we make sense of this senseless violence. But of course, can't make sense of senseless, whatever. Okay, but moving on. And may we unify and not divide during this time. That, of course, is a veiled call for, it's too soon to blame anybody and don't point fingers, don't politicize, etc. But I was struck by the fact that she made a call for unity. And all this, look who wants unity now. Now, she has spent the last couple of weeks saying that Biden says he wants unity, but he doesn't. He's a hypocrite and a liar and a thief, and his son stole money from China and possibly the moon. And, but now all these false calls for unity. Why? I ought to make my own false call for unity, because now I'm implicated because I've gone so crazy dedicating myself to guns as an issue and nothing else that everybody now looks at me funny whenever somebody shoots somebody else. which is maybe an indication that you need to possibly get yourself another agenda item, which would be, a thought. You could ponder that one for a while, Lauren. Think it over. All right, let's see. Other things that I can bring to your attention. I got to dive into my various reservoirs of information here. Let's see. What else is in pocket that I wanted to divert your attention to? Yes. How about this one? We'll dedicate the next segment to filibuster discussion. Both new developments in it or new theories. And Rich, Liberal Thinking, has another entry up, and I got to check in on the written side of what he's got. But he's also, not only has he written this up, but sent us another recorded segment. I might just read through what he has to say because, it might be quicker, might be easier. And I don't know. I've done something in editing the recording he sent me. I've screwed around with the sound level a little bit in order to get some of the background noise out. Not your fault, Rich, but I do have the written product, so we can get to it. But the basics of it are, I think, interesting in that he's now responding. He says thanks for playing the segments on the air, and I hope that's fostering some good discussion for him and the All Progressives group at Daily Kos. But also just says, you made some observations during your playing of these segments, and I'd like to respond to them, and putting up a new post discussing some tinkering with the ideas, as he put them, and also correcting some of the, or filling in some of the gaps that I had questions about when he was quoting other people's pieces, like in Vox. So we'll get to that in a little bit. But let's see, a couple other items to share with you about the investigation into the insurrection, which we discussed a little bit, but then investigations in general, also some new issues there. The Washington Post, let's use this one for our launching pad, brings us this piece today. Trump officials, you're never going to believe this, Trump officials hindered at least 9 key oversight probes. 9 times, as they said in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. 9 times hindered at least 9 key oversight probes, watchdogs said. Some may finally be released in coming months. That's good news. I'd like to find out what the hell's going on. Lisa Rain, Tom Hamburger, Michael Laris, and John Hudson teaming up for this piece again for the Washington Post. Just published this morning, almost as soon as she opened a politically charged investigation in 2019 into, which one is this, whether the Trump White House blocked hurricane relief to a devastated Puerto Rico. It did. The internal watchdog at the Department of Housing and Urban Development ran into obstacles. HUD demanded that their attorneys sit in on witness interviews, a tactic inspectors general said was unusual and could shape witness testimony. White House officials told top agency appointees to withhold their communications, documents, and interviews show. Other records took months to obtain. 4 months after Donald Trump's defeat, Inspector General Ray Oliver Davis still hasn't announced whether her investigation found that Trump inappropriately held up federal disaster aid from an island reeling from a brutal hurricane. I know. Everybody knows that he did, but they have to go through their process in order to officially say that he did it. It's far from the only politically sensitive work by government watchdogs mandated by Congress to monitor federal agencies for waste, fraud, and misconduct. That's the new word to finish that phrase, I guess, that faced roadblocks or otherwise were dragged out during the Trump era. Strategy with everything. Across the government, at least 9 key oversight investigations were impeded by clashes with the White House or political appointees. People familiar with the Inspector General offices and public documents show. Long-anticipated reports were released only this month on 2 senior Trump officials. One found evidence that Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao may have misused her position by repeatedly deploying her staff on personal business. Her husband, by the way, the minority leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell. A second concluded that former White House physician Ronnie Jackson, who's now a member of the House of Representatives, bullied his staff and drank on the job. That's enough to get you kicked out of the British royal family. Although I think they all drink on the job. But bullying your staff, that's a new one. And it's now against the rules for British royals because they got some black people in there. I guess. I don't know. That was the allegation last week. Anyway, the timing meant their damaging disclosures emerged only after the former president left office and Jackson, a former Navy Rear Admiral, was elected to Congress from Texas. Tensions between federal watchdogs and the administration they monitor. Oh, by the way, I guess before I lose this thought, Ronnie Jackson really learned from the master there in terms of like, oh, I bullied my staff and drank on the job, and that's against the rules, and they're going to get me. The only way out is to become an elected official so that I can say, you're targeting me for political reasons. And I guess so far it's working. Tensions between federal watchdogs and the administration they monitor are not uncommon, but 11 inspectors general or their senior aides who served under Trump, many of whom spoke on the condition of anonymity to describe internal government deliberations, said hostility to oversight reached unprecedented levels during his time in office. And I guess if you're talking about 11 inspectors general speaking anonymously, I want you to withhold my name. Basically, if you're looking for a guilty party who spoke to the press and you single them out for punishment because you're Trump/Putin, put the names of all the inspector generals in a hat and pick one, and you'll be right. I'd like to be anonymous, but I understand the instinct to protect yourself. But there's 11 of you talking. I think they're going to guess. But they won't be able to tell which statement you made. But since they're just going to kneecap you anyway, what's the difference? The result, they said, was that the government hid wrongdoing from the public. That sucks. And important reforms to improve government efficiency were ignored. That deserves like a sad trombone, I think, at the very least. With Trump now out of office, advocates for government accountability predict other damaging revelations may only now begin to emerge. IGs under Trump faced an angry, account-settling president, and that's really more of a compliment than anything else. I mean, if he were settling accounts, that evokes that it was done fairly, which it wasn't. He was creating and crediting his own account in these situations and then bashing everybody else. Okay, but you get the idea. An angry, account-settling president who had no compunction about removing those who threatened to reveal bad things about him, said Gordon Hedel, a former inspector general himself at the Defense and Labor Departments who served under Republican and Democratic presidents. A spokeswoman for Trump declined a request to comment. Now let's round up what else he screwed with. Former Trump administration officials who spoke on condition of anonymity to describe internal procedures said that the administration's approach to inspector general investigations was to be cooperative, I doubt that, to resolve disputes whenever possible, and was consistent with precedent and practice across previous administrations. They said the approach included consultation with the Justice Department. Now, I think, by the way, that's all lies. That's the standard response that you're supposed to give. But I don't think any of that was true in the Trump administration. I think the actual instructions that they got was the very opposite. But can I note again for the record, this happens more and more, and we see it all the time. Again, I'll remind you that the people who gave this statement, and remember, I'm reminding you of everything. All right. The statement that was given was, we did everything by the book. We approached investigations conducted by the inspectors general completely according to standing government policy. We cooperated. We encouraged everyone else's cooperation. We sought to resolve disputes whenever possible and act consistent with precedent and practice across previous administrations, right? Again, it's all a lie, but that's what the statement was. Who needs anonymity to say that? To say, I worked inside the administration, and when we were approached by inspectors general, we cooperated fully and acted according to existing precedents across previous administrations, and we sought to be as cooperative as possible and resolve all disputes. Why would you need to be anonymous to say that? And the answer is because it's a lie, and when they find out that you're lying about having cooperated or having been given the instruction to cooperate or both, then they will have your name to charge with perjury later on for, I don't know, although you're speaking to the press, so they can't even really prosecute that as perjury. But if you were whatever it is, in other words, you don't need anonymity for that. And that's something that's been a longstanding pet peeve for a lot of media critics. It's something I've said a long time ago, too, even before there was a radio show. You don't need anonymity to issue a statement that inures to the benefit of the administration you serve in. Anonymity is for people who are afraid of backlash from the government or officials in whatever organization they serve in for telling the truth about things. You certainly shouldn't be given anonymity to lie about things, and you don't need anonymity to give the company line, to say we followed directions, precedents, and legal procedures and did nothing wrong. And not only do you not need to grant anonymity for that, and if somebody asks you for it as a journalist, you should say no, well then fine, I won't give you your statement and you won't have a story. Of course I'll have a story. It will surprise no one. And if an editor even asked me, I would be shocked. I mean, I'm not a journalist, so I don't really know, but I would be surprised. Maybe journalists can weigh in here. If you said the agency said it did nothing wrong, would your editor say, hold on a second, I need to know where you got that from. Who's your source for saying that they did nothing wrong? It was the agency spokesperson. Well, which one specifically? I don't know. They wanted anonymity. I wonder how that discussion would come out. Anyway, we haven't even gotten to rounding up what other crap they were under investigation for. But I'll finish up this portion of the piece here and then maybe scan it during the break to see what else we want to do quickly to get to the rest of the things. But yeah, so they got anonymity, and then someone who didn't request anonymity, Davis. Who are we talking about, Davis? Oh, was that the Inspector General? Yes. Declined to discuss her review of housing aid to Puerto Rico. So still waiting on that result. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, so I'm going to put that one out on live on the Twitter machines to see if anybody has any answer as to why anyone would need anonymity to issue these particular statements. Again, they really need to revamp that, how it's, I guess, taught in journalism school about the circumstances under which you should or shouldn't agree to grant anonymity. But I'd be interested in what their argument was. I'm sure they had a legit one. That is to say, there was a discussion inside the Washington Post editorial structure, and I'd just be curious to find out what it was. Or, you know, maybe it just happens, and they just do these things as a matter of routine, and nobody checks on them, and they say, well, you know, it doesn't hurt the story to have anonymity, I guess, so let's go with it. Anyway, back to the roundup here. Other overdue reports include an inquiry by the Commerce Department's Inspector General into the Trump administration's controversial decision to add a question to the U.S. Census about citizenship. Don't forget that one, right? 2 long-running ethics probes of Ryan Zinke, who hasn't even been in government for years, as it happens anyway. He resigned in the first year of the administration or something. Now, he was Trump's first Interior Secretary, if you've forgotten his name already. Those 2 things remain in limbo more than 2 years after the president forced him out. The Pentagon watchdog has not released the results of a 2-year audit of a $400 million contract to build the border wall that was awarded at Trump's urging to a politically connected North Dakota construction company. Wasn't that the Whitefish Group, right? And that's part of the Ryan Zinke probe. And the General Services Administration Inspector General has blamed slow walking by agency leaders for a delayed review of how federal offices handled the coronavirus last year. I would like to get to the bottom of that. They even discuss, I don't know whether this is one of the ones that are, I don't even know whether it was investigated, but the GSA probably deserves investigation in terms of allowing the Trump Hotel to exist at all, and the emoluments that were laundered through there. But I don't know if that gets a mention in the story here. What else do we have? Administration, lawyers, and used various maneuvers to hinder oversight, according to documents, inspectors general and attorneys representing federal agencies. Lawyers invoked the power of the president and top agency officials to withhold their confidential communications. They insisted on a seat at the witness table or blocked employee interviews altogether. Documents were often released at the pace of dripping faucets or not at all. There was a blatant attempt by the Trump White House to interfere with the work of inspector generals, or inspectors general, it just says IGs in the quote here, that we had not seen before, said Nick Schwellenbach, an expert on the inspector general system at the Project on Government Oversight, a nonpartisan advocate for government reform. Next section here, chafing under oversight, says what? Federal watchdogs oversee roughly 14,000 auditors and investigators across government with a broad mandate that ranges from routine audits of operations and spending to probes of possible criminal activity. 38 of the 75, there are 75 inspectors general, I guess 11 isn't all that much then, who monitor the government's largest agencies, and they are by law appointed by the president and confirmed by Congress. President Biden has not yet made any nominations for any of the 13 jobs, there's an extra word in here, that are vacant and being filled in an acting capacity. Everyone knows about those, right? The acting inspectors general. I'm always worried about them in the wake of the Trump administration. So I guess there are 13 vacancies out there. And there's a little graphic here, just tells us where they're missing. Major agency watchdogs lack permanent leaders. Trump removed multiple inspectors general, and some of his nominees to replace them were not confirmed by the Senate. 38 watchdogs at large agencies are appointed by the president, though currently 13 agencies don't have permanent leadership. All but one require Senate confirmation, and the graphic goes on to tell us, let's see, which ones. This is it. By the way, there's some really serious editorial problems with this piece. Besides the grant of anonymity, which is getting some attention on Twitter, this graphic, then there was the actual copy editing problem of the sentence that said Biden has not made any nominations for any of the 13 of the jobs, that are vacant. But then this graphic is major agency watchdogs lack permanent leaders. And it goes on to say that 13 agencies do not have permanent leadership. And then there's this graphic that says IG offices without permanent leaders, asterisk. And the asterisk I'll give you in a minute. But and then there's, grayed out boxes. The graphic that they've put in here are the little, an outline of a person, a silhouette, like a headshot for places where they're missing. But then they don't tell you what agencies they are. They're just, how many did they say there were? 13. Well, here are 13 gray boxes. Okay, but I knew the number was 13. And then the next part of the graphic says Trump installed inspectors general. There was another how many of them? 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 10 of them. Where are they? Who are they? I don't know. There's just, this time, not gray boxes, but blue boxes with an outline and no person in them. And then nominated by other presidents, there are 4, 8, 12, 13, 14, 15 of them. Where are they? Who are they? Not in the graphic. There's a little bit of detail. There was the asterisk. Permanent IGs who left or were purged under Trump includes DNI, Director of National Intelligence, right? HHS, Health and Human Services Department. Education, Department of Education, Department of Labor, Department of State, and the Treasury Department. So that is 6, right? So there are 13 agencies that don't have permanent leadership. I don't know which agencies they are. The graphic doesn't tell us, but they spent all this real estate on blue and gray boxes with fake silhouettes in them, but that's it. So, again, major editorial shortcoming in this piece, unless named elsewhere. But even if they are named elsewhere, I would say don't waste real estate on this graphic that doesn't tell us anything that the number 13 doesn't adequately convey. The offices the watchdogs lead, created in the aftermath of the Watergate scandal, that's an important part of the history, have traditionally enjoyed political independence and wide powers to subpoena documents and interview employees to root out government wrongdoing. Inspectors general have no set term, and many watchdogs serve for years through multiple administrations. The work of these internal monitors has led to criminal prosecutions, forced the ouster of corrupt officials, and identifies millions of dollars a year in wasteful spending. And I guess the key part there is there's no set term, and many watchdogs serve for years through multiple administrations. And indeed, there are 15 still in office nominated by presidents before Trump. But that just makes it all the more startling that, 13 agencies don't have any inspectors general because Trump purged all of them. These people are just not very frequently fired. But Trump fired them left and right. Where else were we here? Trump chafed under the 40-year-old oversight system because he's a maverick who goes his own way and developed his own style of the presidency. Particularly after several of his cabinet secretaries and top aides came under investigation. Now, Trump is a guy that you think probably has a lot of chafing issues, don't you think? Just his build and the fact that he won't pay tailors. Anyway, last year he replaced 5 career watchdogs over 2 months with political appointees, starting with the intelligence community watchdog, who had informed Congress of a whistleblower's complaint about Trump's dealings with Ukraine. He also forced out the long-serving watchdogs at the state and defense departments, I guess over the same issues. Trump's agency heads followed his lead. In a previously unreported incident, soon after he became Secretary of Veterans Affairs in 2018, Robert Wilkie, never heard much about him, repeatedly implored the White House to dismiss Michael Missal, M-I-S-S-A-L, his agency's inspector general. 2 people familiar with the communications said. Wilkie claimed that the aggressive oversight was harming veterans who would be intimidated from coming forward with information about the agency's shortcomings. The White House declined to act. In a text message, Wilkie wrote that, quote, the picture that the IG's office consistently painted of VA was not the reality of the Trump VA, but an effort to ignore our reforms by saddling us with responsibility for the shortcomings of the previous administration. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has said he requested that Trump fire his department's veteran inspector general, Steve Linick, who was, in fact, ousted last year. At the time, Linick's office was investigating several allegations related to Pompeo, including whether he had used staff to perform personal tasks. Pompeo has said he was unaware of the probe and the firing was not retaliatory. But he went on the record to say it. Linick's ouster stunned advocates of independence for inspectors general, Hedel said. It was devastating to the IG community. The office is now on its 3rd acting director in 10 months. And according to State Department records, at least a dozen senior positions are vacant or now filled by acting officials. The office is still conducting a number of investigations initiated while Trump was in office, spokesman Ryan Holden said. Robert Driscoll, who represented several agency appointees targeted by watchdogs in the Trump era, said that some inspectors general were overly aggressive. A veteran of tussles over inspector general oversight, he said that during Trump's presidency, the watchdogs began to act beyond their authority, propelled by the polarized politics of the time. They engaged in investigations that appeared to exceed their mandate, delving into political questions rather than legal or ethical judgments, he said. But I imagine they all saw all of these questions as political at some level, and that was the problem. The reason that the decisions were made wasn't because they were based on legal or ethical considerations, but because they were made on political considerations. Driscoll added that federal watchdogs took a Soviet-style position when they pushed to limit participation of counsel in investigative interviews. They were essentially arguing that targets of their investigation are not entitled to have counsel present, he said. But they weren't. They were entitled to have counsel present during questioning of the targets of the investigation. But witnesses to the wrongdoing, the alleged wrongdoing, I don't know that they need agency counsel with them. They might need their own. Democrats in Congress, however, said key oversight was ignored or squelched by Trump. They always have problems enforcing the oversight, the Democrats do. 3 Democrats last week introduced legislation to expand the power of inspectors general, and they have discussed new protections to shield the watchdogs from being fired by the president. They are also urging Biden to rapidly fill vacancies in the inspector general ranks, reversing a trend of leaving positions open that dates to Barack Obama's presidency. It's no surprise that several critically important reports about the behavior and decisions of multiple officials are only now becoming public. according to House Oversight and Reform Committee Chair Carolyn Maloney, lamenting that many Trump officials escaped accountability while in office. And there's more, considerably more, and I recommend that you read it. I think at this point, I think we've hit all the highlights of which probes are still outstanding. I think there are probably still a few missing, but good reminders of some of the important ones still out there. And I don't know. I hope we find out some of these things in the end. I think it would be very helpful, I suppose, to find out what's been missing oversight-wise. Let's see. This one I'll save for discussion with Greg tomorrow, more about AstraZeneca. I guess they got good news yesterday that the FDA, I think, decided that they had finished up their trials and everything appeared to be safe and ready to go. And then somebody chimed in with questions about how the trials were conducted and set them back to square one in terms of public relations anyway. And perhaps we can discuss what was behind those objections, if anything, when we have someone with a little more expertise on hand, like Greg, tomorrow. Other areas of interest. I said we would get back to filibuster stuff, and with Joan joining us in the last segment, perhaps now is the time to get to some of that. As I mentioned, Rich had sent me an update on these things, and maybe the fastest way to get through this is to take a look at his email to me of the text of the recorded segment. That way I don't have to deal with the sound issues that I created in trying to clean things up. But yeah, just wanted to chime in here with what Rich had listed for us. He was referring back to the way the ideas on filibuster reform from the Vox article he cited were conveyed. And he was just saying, I was trying to make them brief and clear, and I can see, he says, I didn't succeed in the second goal. But I suppose if he had then spent a great deal of post-real estate simply block quoting from Vox, then Vox could be held directly accountable for any lack of clarity in their proposals. But specifically, there were some questions about their third idea about allowing legislation to pass with a simple majority if it had been stopped by a filibuster in the previous legislative session. Yes, as we supposed right there, because they talked about intervening elections, they really meant in the next Congress, not in the next session. So that solves that question. I think we reached the right conclusion on that one. And then also of their fourth idea, they were suggesting requiring more than just objection to unanimous consent to bring legislation to the floor. And yeah, that's not really how it works. But he says, as your listeners all probably know, the process is more complex than that, but it generally starts with the senators signaling that they will object to a unanimous consent request to move forward. So I use that to summarize the process, and that does explain things. It just cuts out the motion to proceed stuff, which is different. But yeah, generally speaking, they'll first seek unanimous consent. And the first indication that there is trouble is somebody will say, well, I would object to that. I'm going to force you to make a motion to proceed. So he then says, well, let me quote from the Vox article so that you can get the entire context of their proposal. And the quote he chooses here is, reduce the power of individual rogue senators. The Senate could make it harder to initiate a filibuster. Right now, unanimous consent is required to hold a vote without invoking the time-consuming cloture process. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, eventually you'll get to the cloture on the motion to proceed. But the rules could be changed to allow an immediate vote instead of unless a larger block of senators, perhaps 2 or 5 or 10, objected to such a vote instead of just one. Well, anyway, I don't know if that's particularly helpful, but Rich does note for the record here, from his own perspective, I don't support either of those options from Vox, 3 or 4. The option to wait for a next Congress is just too slow. Changing how senators can object to moving forward doesn't change the dynamics. You could require that all 41 senators opposed to moving forward be part of the process, and the Republicans would just bring those 41 senators to object. I think, he says, the answer lies elsewhere. And then just thanks again for playing the segments, and I hope they lead to further discussion, and I hope so too. And when it does lead to further discussion, we'll hear about that, and perhaps in recorded form as well. So thanks again for bringing us that. Let's see. What other items do I want to bring up about the filibuster? Yes. Oh, there was a piece on the recommended list at Daily Kos yesterday that led me to an op-ed in the Los Angeles Times from some notable personages, Erwin Chemerinsky and Bert Newborn. Bert Newborn I'm not as familiar with, but Chemerinsky, do I have his name's pronunciation correct, is dean of the UC Berkeley School of Law. Newborn, it's Neuborne, is the, well, you know how universities are with the endowed chairs. He's a professor of civil liberties at NYU Law School. I feel like now have I shortchanged the donor? Norman Dorson. Norman, thanks very much for endowing the chair of civil liberties at NYU Law School. I guess you're probably dead, but if not, well done. And if so, then well done there too, except to somebody else, your family. Anyway, the op-ed: the filibuster is unconstitutional. Here's how Vice President Harris can take it on. Which, all right. Well, I disagree kind of with the premise, and we can get into the nitty-gritty of it later on. But I'm a little worried about laying this at the feet of Kamala Harris again, like they did with the ruling on the filibuster and the ruling on the Byrd rule in reconciliation. And it really isn't her job to do, and it doesn't really fall to her. And also, as many people reacting to the piece at Daily Kos recognized, ultimately her ruling would be subject to appeal and overturning if the conditions were right by the full Senate. You would still need to have your majority of the Senate lined up to back up what her ruling is, and it's just not necessary. But let me give you the text of the piece, and we can comment along the way or perhaps afterwards about what's up with this thing. There is a clear next step in changing the Senate filibuster. They write, Vice President Kamala Harris, as presiding officer of the Senate, can and should declare the current Senate filibuster rule unconstitutional. Never mind the semantic problem that there's no filibuster rule, but you get the idea, the cloture rule. This would open the door for discussions on a new rule that would respect the minority without giving it an unconstitutional veto. Or it could just open the door for discussions of a new set of rules that has nothing at all about how to close debate. Or that it's just straight up majority rules and screw the minority. It doesn't necessarily lead us anywhere in terms of protecting the rights of the minority in the debate in the Senate. Anyway, they go on to review some history that might be familiar to you as a listener to the show, or if you've ever gone through any of my lengthy backgrounds on the constitutional option article from Gold and Gupta. We mentioned that last week. They recount this history, and it goes like this. In 1957, Vice President Richard Nixon, sitting as presiding officer of the Senate, issued 2 advisory opinions holding that a crucial provision of the Senate's filibuster rule, requiring 2/3 vote to amend it, that is, really 2/3 vote necessary to invoke cloture on a proposed change to the standing rules of the Senate. Remember that? So he issued 2 advisory opinions holding that a crucial provision of the Senate's filibuster rule, requiring 2/3 vote, was unconstitutional. And there's a link here to some discussion of the advisory opinions from the Wilson Center that is a good read and will give you some context that's sort of left out in just the reference here that's actually important to evaluating this piece. We'll discuss that at the end. Nixon's constitutional determination was reaffirmed by subsequent vice presidents Hubert Humphrey and Nelson Rockefeller. So, by the way, that's 3 Republicans. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Hubert Humphrey, obviously, Democrat in the middle. But my eyes are going to Nixon and Rockefeller. Well, 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat. It's a bipartisan agreement. How do you like that? Anyway, in fact, Nixon's ruling, it was this ruling from Nixon that allowed both the Democratic-controlled Senate in 2013 and the Republican-controlled Senate in 2017, by a simple majority vote, to eliminate filibusters for all executive and judicial nominees. I'm disagreeing right here with the dean of the UC Berkeley Law School and the endowed chair professor of civil rights at NYU Law School. And I am right and they are wrong, but I think they're just eliding some facts that we'll get to in the end. But Nixon's constitutional determination really didn't underlie the 2013 or 2017 moves. The only thing that really underlay that was the part of the constitutional reasoning that Nixon used underlay that. That is the part where it says that each house has the prerogative to determine its own rules of proceeding. Yes, but Nixon's ruling was actually more narrow than that. You didn't need you didn't need a ruling from anybody to tell us what the text of the Constitution says. Let me get through their op-ed. It's not that very long. Harris possesses the same power to rule that the current versions of the Senate filibuster, which essentially establishes a 60-vote supermajority rule to enact legislation in the Senate, is unconstitutional because it denies states equal suffrage in the Senate in violation of Article 5 of the Constitution. This is a different argument about the unconstitutionality of the filibuster, and one that's not very frequently encountered. But we don't actually even need to evaluate it. But maybe we will, just for fun, at the end. Wyoming, with 580,000 inhabitants, elects the same number of senators as California, or indeed as Washington, D.C. would if it were a state. California, though, with its 40 million residents, those are the two extremes, right? 580,000 inhabitants in Wyoming get 2 senators. 40 million people in California get 2 senators. A person in Wyoming thus has 65 times more voting power in the Senate than a person living in California. The current 60-vote filibuster rule makes this imbalance even worse. Under the 60-vote rule, 41 senators, representing about a third of the population, can outweigh 59 senators, representing 2/3. This situation surely violates the principle of equal representation in voting. For example, the one-person, one-vote rule that the Supreme Court long ago applied to state legislative and congressional districts. Okay, whatever. Everyone agrees, they say, that the text of the Constitution does not allow for simply giving California more senators than Wyoming, nor can the Senate's lack of representative fairness be cured by adopting internal Senate voting rules. But that does not mean the Senate has authority to create even more unfairness than already exists. In fact, Article 1 of the Constitution does not appear to permit a broad 60-vote supermajority rule. This is the argument about constitutionality that we've heard before. That article sets forth supermajority votes in the Senate only in narrowly defined cases like ratifying treaties, overturning presidential vetoes, and convicting impeached officials. The strong implication, and that's all it is that unless the action falls into these narrow exceptions, the Senate should operate by majority rule. Article 1 says nothing about a general supermajority requirement for the enactment of all legislation in the Senate. But of course, as you recall from our parsing this stuff before, it doesn't require a supermajority for the enactment of legislation. It requires a supermajority for the procedural hurdle of closing debate so that you can get to that vote, which of course requires only a majority. And while the 17th Amendment revolutionized the Senate by shifting the election of senators from state legislators to the voters, it preserved the founders' decision to give each state 2 senators with equal voting rights, but a 60-vote supermajority rule destroys the mathematical equality of each senator's vote. We believe the best way forward, they say, is for Harris to rule that the current version of the Senate filibuster operates as an unconstitutional 60-vote supermajority requirement for the enactment of general legislation in violation of Article 5, the 17th Amendment, and the constitutional presumption of majority rule. Such a ruling would trigger 2 events. What are those events? The full Senate could seek to overrule Harris by majority vote, They always could do that. Senators would no longer be debating the filibuster as mere political policy, though, in that question, but as a profound constitutional question. Senator Joe Manchin and a Republican senator or two might, well, care about ensuring that no state is deprived of equal suffrage under the Constitution. At the same time, discussions could begin about what a constitutional rule protecting the Senate minority might look like. And there they discuss the various options that have been discussed before, but they start from this constitutional premise. We'll probably attack that next. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Joan McCarter is with us and ready to roll on discussion. I don't know whether I want to force the whole thing to be about filibuster reform once again, but we do have a question in our... does anybody remember what Article 5 of the Constitution actually encompasses? Because you don't hear about it a whole lot. We know that the branches of government are described in Articles 1, 2, and 3. And occasionally Article 4 comes up because whenever somebody says they should mint the platinum coin to pay off the debt or whatever, and we have to worry about the full faith and credit of the country and the Treasury. But Article 5, and it's not long, Article 5 is the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to the Constitution. So how to amend the Constitution is in Article 5. I think I used to make the joke on Twitter, repeal Article 5. I used to call for it. But anyway, and no one got it and it wasn't funny. But anyway.
You do sort of have to.
You gotta be an insider, I guess.
It's a little obscure for a joke.
Not an insider,
yes.
but you got to have a copy handy, or be a law professor. So the Congress, okay, so they can propose amendments, and then, or you can call for a convention of the states, et cetera, all of this stuff. So why does that, provided that no amendment, which maybe, nothing jumps out at me about, like, why Article 5.
This is the home of getting rid of the filibuster? Yeah.
Yeah. But there were other arguments. It wasn't all resting on Article 5. But, without reading through the boring language, it's not that necessary.
But maybe we ought to repeal this last sentence.
Oh?
And that no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate.
There we go. Is that what it is? Okay, that must be where it's coming from.
Yeah.
Let me take a look. I got so bored reading through the one paragraph. It's a very low attention span, I think, thanks to Twitter and maybe COVID. But yeah, maybe that's where it comes from. No state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. Then I was wondering, where does even that phrase, they did bring up equal suffrage in the Senate. I don't really recognize it, but that's where it's from. And so I guess they're talking here about, well, Californians have 65 times less say in who sits in the 2 seats in the Senate than people from Wyoming do. And that's supposed to be equal suffrage in the Senate. But I mean, I don't know. That's also subject to interpretation. I guess certainly if I'm a conservative justice, I'm sitting here saying equal suffrage in no state shall be deprived of equal suffrage in the Senate. Well, how many votes does Wyoming have in the Senate? 2. How many does California have? 2. It's funny because I read that as equal suffrage in the Senate.
Yeah.
In the Senate. Yeah. And now on the ground where people vote, maybe dilution. And maybe now that we've changed maybe this is where they bring in the 17th Amendment and they say, well, now the senators are directly elected. They're not appointed by state legislatures anymore. And Article 5, when it says that the state shall not be deprived of its equal suffrage. They were thinking of the state legislatures then, and now the people, it matters what the population is, and that Article 5 was never changed when the 17th Amendment was adopted. But yeah, I don't know. That's kind of weak, that part, actually.
Yeah.
But the real problem of it is that there's no reason in the world to lay this at the feet of the vice president, Kamala Harris, or any other vice president. And it's true that vice presidents have made rulings like this in the past. And here is where the nuance counts. And there's a link to this piece describing the advisory opinions that Nixon made in 1957. And there's no date on the piece, but if you read it, it becomes obvious, well, to weirdos like me who are steeped in this. It's an old piece, and it's written prior to the 2013 nuclear option that Harry Reid exercised to change the votes on most judges, and executive appointments. And why that matters is that prior to the 2013 usage of the nuclear option, the theory was the one that Nixon outlined, which was that there was this magical period at the beginning of a new Congress where senators could object to the continuance of the rules without an explicit vote, and use that to, that Nixon said, well, if you haven't adopted or affirmatively allowed the rules to continue, you're just sort of operating under general parliamentary law where majority rule obtains for everything. And at that point, you could then change the rules, including the filibuster procedures, by majority vote, because the cloture rule, Rule 22, hadn't yet been adopted by the new Senate. But Harry Reid did a different thing in 2013, doing this in November and just saying, look, all we really need is a ruling from the chair, one way or the other. It doesn't even matter what the chair says, as so long as a majority of the Senate is going to say what it wants to do. So, yeah, that's the basic thing. Kamala Harris isn't needed in this.
No.
So
and don't
blame
put
her.
that on her.
Yeah.
She doesn't need that.
She's just working for Joe Biden at the moment. She's doing a good job. Everything's fine. Yeah. She's got enough on her plate as it is. First woman vice president, first vice president of color. Let's take it easy.
Yeah.
She doesn't. I'm not saying we make the job easier. It's already too hard. But
yes.
Don't give her anything that doesn't require her attention. She surely could be spending her attention.
And that's going to be hugely controversial and make her even more hated
by
by the right.
Yeah. So anyway, the bottom line of it is, if a majority of the Senate decides that they want to change this rule at any time, they can, and that's the power that comes from Article 1 that they cite here, that they can decide on their own rules of proceeding. And the major part of what Nixon had to say was this sort of recognition of this, magical period at the beginning of a new Senate. That's the key part of his ruling, and that has nothing to do with what they're calling for here, because they're past that in this Senate too. So I don't know. I guess I should take over as dean of the UC Berkeley School of Law from this point on. Or if I want to stay East Coast, I could take the endowed chair that this other writer occupies as professor of civil liberties at NYU Law School, which is also a good job, although he's probably got to teach, and that's hard.
John Hughes at Berkeley. So.
Yeah. Oh, well, but if I was the dean, maybe he wouldn't be.
You could can him.
There we go. Erwin, you've probably been thinking about retiring for a while now.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Anyway, this is not the way that they need to do it.
No. So no fault of Kamala Harris there, and there's no reason to pressure her to do anything special or weird. Nor would she really need to probably be present for certainly not for the decision, although maybe she may have to break a tie in the vote.
She may have to.
So that's enough pressure. Don't also make her have to vote in favor of her own ruling. That is unnecessary, and people will think that's unfair and screwy. So don't do it.
And putting the onus back on Senate Democrats. There was a little movement over the weekend with Feinstein saying, well, yeah, okay, we can talk about the talking filibuster.
All right. Yes, that's true.
So that's movement.
Yeah. That was an interesting development over the weekend. And, yeah.
I think we saw last week a real, okay, this is what we're going to do. It's going to be the talking filibuster. We're all going to say it, including Joe Biden, and we're going to get Manchin and Sinema used to that idea.
All right.
That's how I read it.
Okay. I will take it. It's it's a problematic stopping point, but what do I care? I know how to solve those problems.
Well, we got that far, but now we have the problem of Joe Manchin saying, well, yeah, okay, talking filibuster, but we still have to have 60-vote majority, which I don't really see the point.
Yeah, I don't know.
We talk, and then we still have to get 60 votes?
Yeah, that's troublesome. But yeah, they'll have to tailor it so that the end of the talking triggers a majority vote. I mean, and that's really it. That's got to be it.
It's not the talking part that's the problem. It's the 60 vote part that's the problem.
Yeah, right. It's if you can't get to a final vote. Right now, it's just frustrating that they don't have to talk in order to delay the vote. But if you add, now they have to talk, but then they can also delay the vote by withholding their votes on cloture, then you've just added a lot of talking to things.
Yeah.
And you haven't made it harder, because if they fail to hold the floor with the talking, like you demand, then they just fall back on the vote and vote no on cloture. And I mean, I imagine the first filibuster will be long under this new rule because everyone will be interested in it. And then the second one will just be 10 seconds long. They'll say, you know what, I'm not going to talk. So then they'll go,
because they don't need to.
We didn't do anything.
So, I don't know if, I have no idea anything about Manchin, honestly.
No.
I don't understand him. I don't know what he's thinking. I don't know if he's thinking. I don't know if he's saying things on the fly without having thought them through.
All possible.
I think he's enjoying the attention.
Sure. West Virginia.
I think Sinema is resenting his attention and trying to get some of her own. So she's signing on to obnoxious letters with John Cornyn about immigration.
Yes, that's weird. And although I guess she managed to put together a letter that Cornyn signed and then got himself crossed up and in trouble because he immediately contradicted himself with his statements. But she wrote a perfectly nice letter for Sinema, anyway, saying that we should be humane in whatever we do on the border. And John Cornyn was foolish enough to sign that because he doesn't believe in humane treatment.
Now he's committed to being humane.
Yeah. So he can abandon that one pretty quickly, but I don't know. So
I don't think we need Sinema putting herself forward on immigration, however. Not at this point in time.
Yeah, I don't know how we avoid it being from Arizona, but okay. So there's nothing we can do to stop them there. All right.
So I don't know where we're at with the filibuster right now.
Right. Well,
last week looked really good. Everybody's being kind of quiet now. We're seeing some problems with H.R. 1 coming up from various boards of elections saying that it's really not practicable.
Okay, yeah, I think that's... I saw there was an article widely circulating yesterday because we took note of it because they used the word the cluster F in the headline, which was maybe not a real reasoned approach to dealing with the problem, but the objections you're saying are legit from local elections officials?
I think so.
Or at least they're making them.
I think that they didn't really think through how a lot of the things that they are demanding can be funded, can be dealt with through state legislatures that will need to help in terms of funding.
Okay.
We'll see. We'll see.
All right. Well,
a lot of this could be addressed by the Senate, which is going to start its hearings on S1 tomorrow.
Okay.
In Klobuchar's committee, in Klobuchar's Rules Committee.
Will come up.
So, there could be some rewriting.
I imagine there would be.
Help address these issues.
Okay. So that's a possibility, too. I guess we'll spend some time maybe later in the week. We'll actually read the Cluster F article, which was so distracting from the headline. And everybody was imploring us to read the article, although the journalists were imploring us to read the article so that we didn't falsely accuse them of opposing H.R. 1 at its core, but they actually had some interesting things to say about real objections from people on the ground on the front lines of administering elections. But somehow that didn't make it into the headline, but Cluster F did.
So. Well, yeah, because these people, because of course, these are people who do want their elections to go forward. That, we saw it in Georgia with all of the pressure Trump was putting on elections officials in Georgia. Even the Republicans were just trying to have a good election where people could vote and where they weren't going to be targeted for problems. Yeah. So I think most of the people who spoke up in this article, I'm speaking without having read the entire thing, are saying, look, we want to make this work. We want this law to work, but it's going to be some problems for us.
All right.
So
we'll dive into that and find out what's what, but I think it's going to take some dissection.
Yeah.
All right.
And I'm hoping that it spurs Klobuchar and her committee members into looking into this a little bit and thinking about some revisions they can make.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I still think this is the bill that we need to use to break the filibuster.
Yeah, so you're going to want it to be sound all around and worthy of, say, Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema's attention and support, and that there's no outs for them to say, I would be with you except for this thing. My local elections guy says. Exactly. Yeah. Also, this provision about putting a car dealership in D.C. probably we should get rid of.
And a landfill.
Yeah. All right. I almost forgot the landfill. It was such a strange statement on Republican priorities.
What a setup for 10,000 jokes about the cesspool of Washington, D.C. and Congress.
Honestly, airports, car dealerships, you have to have extractive mining, car dealerships, and a landfill. Like, I went to Congress to try to force that stuff on every state. Everybody needs to have these things. What? Yeah, that was a weird thing. And of course, it would never occur to them, like, the ratio of daycare to affordable housing and good jobs is not good enough to be a state. That would never be an issue for them. But there's not landfills, not enough people burying guns in their backyards. Right. Whatever. Okay. That's what makes a state. According to Republicans, that was a very revealing discussion, let's say.
It was.
All right.
It really was. Every day brings a new revelation about how intellectually bankrupt the Republican Party has become.
They're very weird people, and even from there are so many.
Last week's Heritage Foundation deciding to have the seminar on how about the monarchy. Can't remember the phrasing of the seminar, but something about how critical to Western democracy the monarchy is.
I don't know.
Leftist challenges to the monarchy are destroying American democracy?
Somehow, I guess, right? I don't know. I think that means that we have to restore all the King George statues now? Is that?
I think we might.
Yeah, because obviously they forgot their history because the statue was gone. They might be right about that. So we got to put that one back up. I believe we melted it for cannons. So I guess we got to melt some cannons to make the statue again.
To bring the statue back.
Yeah, so that we don't forget our history. That was very weird, and I guess they were trying to capitalize and get clicks off of the Oprah Winfrey interview, I guess. What else could it possibly be? But yeah, all right. I don't know. Heritage Foundation. Heritage. But my heritage is monarchy.
Heritage.
I guess so. Well, I guess if you're Anglo-Saxon, I guess there's monarchy in your heritage and whatever. Man, that was very weird. Heritage Foundation has really gone down the toilet. That's supposed to be like the pinnacle of conservative think tank hierarchy. You know, like those are supposed to be the smartest, most impressive people they've got. And then was the Heritage Foundation guy at the hearing yesterday who said that yard signs, because D.C. residents could have yard signs, the founders meant for them not to be a state. They would have undue influence over the legislature, who would not be able to resist the the messaging of their yard signs, even though, I mean, there appear to be signs there, even though it's not a state. And if you turn it into a state, it would still be yards and signs. And I'm not sure what that had to do with anything, but I don't know. That's the Heritage Foundation for you.
I think it has something to do with racism, to tell you the truth.
You think there could be something
Here,
in the
I
bottom?
found it.
Okay.
The Heritage Foundation is hosting a 325. Oh, this is in 2 days. The Crown Under Fire: Why the Left's Campaign to Cancel the Monarchy and Undermine a Cornerstone of Western Democracy Will Fail.
Well, at least it will fail. So now we don't have to worry about it or go to the event.
No, we're going to fail. The canceling's going to fail.
Oh. Well, then, yeah, right. So the monarchy will be in place and no one has anything to worry about.
Okay, what it's about is the racism. Let's just, put that there.
Are we sure? Okay. Yeah. This is a virtual event. You can all attend from home. I don't recommend that you do it.
Nobody was trying to cancel the monarchy until Meghan Markle came along. Right.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Not Ireland, not the British Empire.
Not the American Revolution.
Oh, right, that country. I almost forgot about them.
Yeah.
All right. Well, look, I have no idea what they're just, I guess they thought that it would capitalize off of the interview. Are they charging to go to this thing? I don't know. This is an RSVP button. I'm going to click on it and see what do they ask for money? I'm curious because I guess they just want clicks. Name, address, blah, blah, blah. You got to have credentials, et cetera. What's your organization? So what the Heritage Foundation is doing, worrying about the monarchy being under fire, I have no idea. I thought it was supposed to be American heritage that this foundation was worried about. The Heritage Foundation. Oh, yeah. You all are familiar with the Heritage Foundation. You've seen their logo before. You know it, right? Have you got their page open?
Let me open and go look at their logo again. It's blue, right?
Yeah, yep. Mm-hmm. And they have a little graphic element in there. And it's
it's
a
the
bell.
Liberty Bell.
Oh, that bell, yes. Oh, I thought it might be Big Ben. But it's not. It's the Liberty Bell. American liberty and the monarchy, because that's what... All right, so that's where they are. They're now inviting British members of Parliament to come and join their panel. And
I wonder if this is why the Heritage Foundation president and executive vice president announced their resignation, which is the first thing up on their homepage.
I heard that had happened, and I couldn't... Well, that would be odd if that was that was the reason, but I'd be curious to know what they are. President and vice president, executive vice president announcer. Who are they? I don't even know who they're...
President Casey James and Executive Vice President Dr. Kim Holmes. James is staying on as president for 6 months until a replacement is found. After she will become a distinguished visiting fellow. Holmes is gone as of April 16th, and we don't... Oh, we accomplished everything we set out to do, so now it's time to let somebody else... So, okay, we're done.
We finished everything. The whole heritage is done now, and we're going to be back with the monarchy.
What they're declaring victory for, but they've done it. So
okay, well, congratulations to them. That's great news. I think they're just getting older and maybe want to retire or whatever. But okay, whatever. I mean, I just remember that I guess it was the executive directorship is usually the one who is the one you see in the papers, but didn't Jim DeMint do that for a while? And
Yeah.
he resigned, and now these people, I guess, are just board members who've just been paying themselves to hang around and look distinguished, I guess, and
think deep thoughts
about heritage and monarchy.
How we need to preserve the monarchy.
Yeah, and yard
democracy.
signs. Very odd. So good. I hope it's the collapse and end of the Heritage Foundation forever and ever. You could always hope for it. If the NRA is bankrupt, they can be too, I guess.
But the NRA had a great victory in Colorado.
Oh, yes, right. Now, I saw that in passing. As always, great timing, the NRA.
Yeah.
What did they do?
Last week, a judge had to declare that Boulder couldn't ban assault weapons.
Yes, okay. Based on
Because
who knows
of
what.
Colorado state law saying, one of our favorite ALEC laws saying municipalities can't do things like say you can't have an assault weapon within them.
All right. Well, we'll see if we can find the ruling in one day and parse through the reasoning. But yeah, so, I mean, I imagine that that our shooter had gotten a hold of his AR-15 already and didn't wait for the results of the court case to go and buy it. But still, well, that'll be interesting to see whether...
Okay. So Boulder had tried to put a 2-year ban on assault weapons and large capacity magazines, and that butted up against state law, which says municipalities can't do that. So the judge, I feel horrible for this judge.
Yeah, he's going to be in...
Who last week had to say, sorry, you can't enforce this ban.
I mean, he may be right in terms of what the law in Colorado is. It's just a bad law. Well, we'll see how far, or whether that gets appealed and whether the political climate changes the outcome, or, when you get to an appellate court that might have more flexibility in saying, well, that is what the law says, but the law has problems. We'll see. And I don't know what the state of the Colorado Supreme Court is. We'll have to ask our friends on the ground in Colorado. And, I have a feeling they may say, are you kidding? State of courts all over the country is pretty much the same. But,
Yeah.
But I believe they elect their Supreme Court, don't they?
I think that they do in Colorado.
Yeah. I mean, I think I recall hearing about the importance of those elections. But you never know. I can't keep straight which states do and don't. But, well, I'll check it out. And Coloradans, if you scream a little louder at Twitter, might hear you answering before we wrap up the show today. But I'll look it up. But, yeah, that's definitely going to affect, I think, well, it's certainly going to change the atmosphere in which they make these decisions. But this wouldn't be the first time dealing with this either for Colorado. It wasn't the same area, but I think it was Colorado Springs. I'm thinking back, 6-8 years ago. They too had had legalized open carry of long rifles.
Yeah,
and they had somebody walking down the street doing an open carry walk, and people were calling the cops nervous about it, and they said, sorry, there's nothing we can do. And then he decided to become a mass shooter and just start shooting people in the intersection, I recall, at the time. And everybody was like, hey, our law might be really stupid. And I think it would be an interesting thing to see this case and yesterday's...
If we think, this law was really stupid.
It might be a problem.
It is.
It is, and I guess this illustrates it. And once again, we find out that, it takes the worst possible outcome, which is really about the easiest imaginable bad outcome for those laws. I'm sure they came up during the debate. And I'm sure the answer was, no, that'll never happen. Just like the Heritage Foundation supporting the British monarchy will never happen. All right. Well, it's a weird day, that's for sure. Thank you for coming by and
day.
visiting. And I appreciate being able to share the weird mix of stories that we have with you. And
it was a random day. I apologize for that. I did not come in with an agenda other than to defend Kamala Harris. And
that's a fine agenda.
Make fun of Republicans. So
we made you responsible for an agenda while we goofed off every day and did nothing. That would be highly unfair. We never have an agenda. But our only agenda is defending our right to have you come on the show and join us for discussion. So I appreciate that. I'll check in with you next week. A pleasure as always, Joan. Take care. Time now for us to turn things over to Justice Putnam. After this brief announcement.
You have been listening to Kagro
switch over and figure out what's up, too.
With David Waldman.
All right, I talked all over that thing, and now I don't even have time to tell you about what's coming up next. But how about this? Congressman Clyburn torches McConnell for voter suppression and encouraged Democratic legislators to play hardball. You know what that's all about. H.R. 1, soon to be S1 as well, and I'm sure the filibuster. Stay tuned for more next.